Scott Cunningham, host of the Mixtape with Scott podcast, a podcast devoted to listening to the personal stories of living economists and to creating a oral history of the last 50 years of the profession. This podcast is based on the idea that we desperately need to hear the stories of other people to kind of navigate our own lives. And this week, I have a person that I have been an admirer of for about 20 years. I've only spoken to him one time, so this was a lot of fun to get to have an excuse to talk to him for a longer amount of time. That's kind of the upside for me of the podcast. I get to finally have like an hour-long conversation with a lot of my heroes. This is Matthew Jackson, the William Eberly Professor of Economics at Stanford University and an external faculty member at Santa Fe Institute, which I did not know about until we started talking. And then as soon as he said that he was external faculty at Santa Fe, I thought, well, that's obvious that he would be there. That's a genius. Whoever had that idea was a genius. The amount of accolades that Matt has is so long that in prepping this, I couldn't even in trying to figure out what to talk about. I forgot like what schools he'd even gone to. It was just this never ending list of awards. So I'm just going to list out some stuff here. He is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, fellow of the Econometric Society, Game Theory Society fellow, and an Economic Theory fellow. He's other awards. He got a Guggenheim Fellowship, Social Choice and Welfare Prize, von Neumann Award from the Rack Laszlo College. It just goes on and on. Okay. And I bet you there'll be another big award one day that's listed on this biography. It starts with an N. He is a brilliant, extremely humble, very nice man to talk to. And he's one of the leading experts on the economics of networks. And you could even probably argue, one of its main pioneers, going back 30 years now. Author of a wonderful textbook that we use at Baylor in our Micro 1 class to teach our students economics, microeconomics. He's just incredible. So the interview, I hope, will be interesting. Doesn't get nearly as deep into the network theory. Towards the end, we talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. So anyway, I said too many ums in this, but it's a pleasure to have him on the show, and I hope you enjoy it. And thanks so much for tuning in. Bye-bye. All right. Well, it is a pleasure to have on the podcast today a person that I've actually for a long, long time been a huge admirer, even though I'm not a theorist. I've been a huge admirer for a long time, and it's Dr. Matthew Jackson. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Well, thanks, Scott. It's really wonderful to talk with you.
Well, before we get started, I've already said your name, Matthew Jackson, but for the sake of the listener, can you tell us your full title and who pays your paycheck?
So I'm the William D. Eberly Professor of Economics at Stanford University. So they pay my paycheck.
They pay your paycheck?
Yeah. I'm also an external faculty at Santa Fe Institute. So
Oh, that's cool. How long have you
yeah.
been doing that?
I've been doing that, I guess the first time I was just there this weekend for a symposium on 40 years of the SFI. And I realized I'd been there since, I guess the first time I went was 2008. So, it's been 16 years I've been going there.
Oh, that's so cool. I only know about it from Sam Bolt, but I mean, how many economists are associated with it?
Not many.
Not many?
No. So Sam, Sam. There's Scott Page. I mean, there's a group of people who do economics, but it's more organized around types of things that people think about, the types of models people do, complexity, and other kinds of things. So networks naturally fits into it, and I've been involved with work with Sam Bowles, and yeah, it's an exciting place. It shakes your thought quite a bit compared to the usual places you're hanging around.
Oh, that's so cool. I did not realize, it's like look at your Vita is like the the amount of things on it, and I must have missed it. That's so neat. Okay, well, cool. Well, before we get started, I want to start with an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you took in your life that every now and then you think about it from time to time? Doesn't have to have been your favorite or your least favorite, but you've noticed that if, as you think about it, you've thought about it more than once.
Oh, well, I guess yeah, I wouldn't put it as a vacation, but when I was growing up, my family, we moved back and forth between the US and France a couple of times. So we lived
Oh,
in France for, I guess, a year when I was like 4 and 5 years old, and then again a year when I was a teenager.
oh,
And those years probably shaped me more than anything. That when I look back and I think about the way I think about the world and
huh.
how I vision myself and so forth, those years were really formative. And yeah, I think about them all the time. And I think, people I knew then and places we went to, and, what it was like for our family.
Wow. How big
And
was your family? You had siblings?
yeah, I have a younger sister and an older brother. And then my father was a physicist. So he
Oh,
was, studying high energy nuclear particle physics.
wow.
And France, after the Second World War, de Gaulle put a huge amount of money into making France a leader in nuclear physics. And
Oh,
so
wow.
we spent, yeah, a couple of years there, and just taking a kid from Chicago and moving them into France, it's a really different experience. So,
How long would you stay there every year?
well, I mean, we just went a couple of times, but a year each time, maybe
Oh,
a year and
wow.
a half or 2 years. So I was in school. I went to school there and learned to speak French the first time, then forgot it completely, and then learned French again the second time. Uh,
Oh, man.
yeah,
Wait,
yeah.
was it ever high school?
So the second time I was there was basically eighth grade to ninth grade. So it would have been, they call it college. It's basically their upper middle school before high school.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So did you make good friends while you were there?
Yeah, I mean, I made friends. I lost touch with them over the years. I reconnected with one of them a few years ago but just, accidentally met him on the telephone. I was calling
Huh.
up someone, but yeah. So but just I think it was really formative for our family. You're sort of like as a family unit when you go somewhere where you're completely out of your ordinary environment,
Mm.
you become more dependent on your siblings and your
Oh,
family,
yeah.
pushes you together in some ways.
Oh, that's so neat. Where in France was it each time? Same place
Um,
both times?
yeah, we lived in Paris both times.
Oh,
So it was,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Um, well, so your dad was a physicist, he was an academic, I guess. Was that right?
Yeah, I mean, he was, so it's interesting, I guess, like if I think about my childhood, I would say, he was a research scientist at Argonne National Laboratory.
Oh.
Argonne is outside of Chicago. And so, in terms of like economically, we probably grew up as lower middle class.
Hmm.
It, I don't think they paid well. I think when I got
Uh-huh.
my first job, I was paid already better than my father was. Um, but but I grew up in an educated family, but not a wealthy family, right? So it was
Yeah.
sort
Yeah.
of, but it was yeah, and it was a really interesting childhood.
Huh. What did your mom do?
So my mom, she was an English major. She went to college. She was an English
Mm,
major. But she, was basically a, stay-at-home mom, raised us.
mm,
Uh, she actually became an artist. So,
mm,
after we left the house, she became an artist.
mm,
She did oil paintings, prints. She was incredibly creative
mm.
and very actually a very nice artist. We have a lot of her art in our house now.
Oh, wow.
But she was quite talented.
Huh. That's neat. So you got your dad that's the high level physicist, and you've got this really talented uh create different kind of creativity, creative mom. That must have been an interesting household. How did they meet
That's
each other? How
as
did
what?
how did your parents meet?
It's interesting. So they met, my father was doing his PhD at Cornell, and he was working, he was doing work on some kind of particle accelerator.
Oh.
And my mother, after Purdue, I don't know how she ended up at Cornell as an aide in a lab, but that was the job she got going on. And so they
Oh.
met in Cornell, and then were married shortly thereafter. Uh,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, so you grew up in Chicago, but you said it was the suburbs, but like you would did you sort of spend time a little bit inside the city too as a kid?
A little. I mean, not much.
Yeah.
It didn't move around that much then. So it's sort of like a western suburb, uh,
Mm.
pretty, you know, suburban childhood in many
Hmm.
ways. I actually, I guess at that point in time, since our family didn't have a lot of money, I worked a lot of jobs. So it was
Oh,
um, I worked in warehouses, unloading trucks. I worked as a night watchman. I worked as I did lawns and delivered papers, however to make
yeah.
money and sort of save up for college and pay bills.
Yeah. Yeah. So as a kid, so like when you get back from France, like let's say ninth grade, did you have your horizons have been just, so broadened, I'm sure. What did you kind of envision that you wanted your life to be about? Were you already having those thoughts as a ninth grader?
Yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted to travel a lot, so
Mm,
I ended up doing that because of this profession. As an economist,
yeah.
as an academic, you get to travel a lot. I had no idea how to do that or how that would work out,
Yeah.
but I did want to study more. I really enjoyed. So actually, I think I've probably fell in love with math during
Mm,
that year in France the
mm,
second time. And it was interesting because you're sort of thrown into a school where everybody's speaking French. You don't really speak French.
mm,
So you're doing pretty miserably in a lot of courses. But
hmm.
math was the one course I could do well in because it was all logic and
Oh,
symbols and
yeah.
yeah,
Right.
so I really gravitated towards math probably more than ever in that. And that had a really good he was actually from North Africa. He was a North African Frenchman who taught math, and he was really good, Monsieur Attas,
Huh.
and that sort of got me hooked in math. And then I knew I wanted to go on to to college and so forth.
Huh. So you get back. Oh, so you knew you remember this man.
Oh
He
yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, I remember him really well. Uh,
oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He was a very impressive, very exacting. He loved math and he had this energy about him that I really fell in love with math that year.
huh. Were your parents surprised that you were so good at math? I mean, your dad's a physicist, so it's probably like in the blood. But I mean, were they sort of they took notice of the fact that you had this emerging like real math ability?
I mean, I think my parents always encouraged all of us to be thinking about the world. We had lots of
Mm,
books around the house on science and nature, and if we were allowed to watch television, it was PBS Nova
uh-huh.
specials or something, right?
Yeah.
So, it was that kind of childhood a little bit. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was fun, and I think they encouraged that a bit.
Well, so if I could have like eavesdropped in the faculty lounge, like in the 11th grade or something, and heard the teachers talking about you, what would they have been saying about the kind of student that you were and what they sort of saw in you?
I mean, as a student, I don't know. Like in a suburban high school, you're one of, I don't know, my high school probably had a couple thousand students or more.
Mm,
So I'm not sure how much they see in individual students, but I think um, I and also I was an athlete at that point in time, so I I very much was more the um, yeah, spending a lot of time in the gym more than in the classroom.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
but I think I got by more just on, you know, uh, a little bit of understanding stuff reasonably quickly more than hard work at that
Mm,
point in time. I
yeah.
was doing more hard work in the gym than I was in classes, but um,
What sports were your favorites?
um, I I was a gymnast in high school and college.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so
Did
that
you
was
go to college on like a scholarship?
not a scholarship, no, because I went to Princeton and they don't have
That's
academic
right.
scholarships for athletes, but and actually they weren't supporting the gymnastics program a lot, so um, but and I think as a gymnast I was decent, but I wasn't good enough to get like a full ride at one of the premier gymnastics schools at that point in
Yeah.
time.
How'd you get interested in gymnastics? That's the first time.
Um,
I actually have never met a very many gymnasts from high school era, especially guys. I don't, how'd you get interested in that?
Yeah, so Chicago, believe it or not, for some unknown reason, had a lot of high school gymnastics. So there were a lot of high schools that had gymnastics programs, and the high school I went to actually had been state champions in gymnastics a bunch of times. And so they had this program
Oh,
where they went out into the school and recruited students. And I was this small, like, I don't know, freshman year, I probably weighed 80 pounds or 90 pounds. So
uh-huh.
I had the right body type. I was this tiny, you know, scrawny guy.
Yeah.
And they recruited people and brought them in. And, as you actually starting when you're, 14 years old is starting late in gymnastics.
Oh, it
Uh,
is.
yeah, but they had a program and they brought people in and then that becomes your friendship group and you just you become part of it and yeah, it was very formative for me because it taught me how lots of hours pay off,
Right.
right?
You got to be very good. You worked really hard and got to be pretty really good.
I got to be decent,
Yeah.
so I think I didn't have the natural talent at that, but I realized how much work you had to put into something
Right.
to be good at it, and so yeah, we did very, I think, overachieved a bit, but it was
Yeah.
yeah.
That's cool. Well, so you end up going to Princeton and I was so that would have been you graduate in 84, so it's like 79. You're like class of 79 or something like that, class
Or
of
class of
80.
80, yeah, class of
Yeah.
80 in high school and then 84 at Princeton, yeah, yeah.
I mean, what was it like going to, you said you grew up lower middle class. Must have been just so exciting to get into Princeton and go there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, the Princeton's a pretty amazing place in many ways, and the the emphasis they put on undergraduate education
Mm,
is really something.
mm.
Uh, it was also very jarring as coming from a large public high school, where to go into Princeton where a lot of people had come from prep schools
Oh,
and it was a different world that many of them had lived in.
yeah.
So it was interesting. Yeah, it's a quite fascinating place in many ways.
Well, so what was not to be funny, but like what was the social network like? What did you notice being outside of it? You probably had a lot of interesting insights about what the social network was like for those first year or those Princeton students.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that a lot of them knew each other already from those schools
Mm,
and had also, people who had actually lived away at a school, like, prep schools where you live in dormitories and so forth,
yeah.
had a little bit more experience living away from home and, being in
Mm,
that environment. They also were more college prepped in the sense that they, knew a lot of the classics already and
mm,
had more of that kind of background.
hmm.
So it was a very different education going in that they had. I think the
Yeah.
only thing that I probably, I think the math and science courses I had were reasonably good. And so I was, okay on that level, but like just in terms of their knowledge of literature and things like that were completely foreign to me.
Mm, mm. I'm just thinking now, you said your friendship group was so much connected to gymnastics, but then you end up you're playing gymnastics in college. So does that continue? You end up still
Yeah.
having those friendships?
Yeah, yeah. So actually, when I went there, I thought, I spent so many hours in a gym in college, or sorry, in high school. I thought, I'm not going to do this in college. So I
Mm.
wasn't planning on doing it. But then the um the one of my best friends in college turned out to be the captain of the gymnastics team. He was,
Mm.
the current captain. He came out and he found me and
Mm.
said, "Look, you got to come into the gym and work out, and join the team." So it was a really small. We were sort of understaffed in terms of number of gymnasts and so forth, but we cobbled together a team of,
Oh,
and so it was fun. It was a yeah, and so again, it became a friendship group, where you form tight bonds, and um, yeah, so it was,
that was your close buddies in college, was the
yeah,
gymnastics group. Do
yeah,
you
yeah. I
still
mean,
keep up with them?
yes, yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's cool.
So it was a tight knit group.
Well, so you majored in econ as an undergrad, right? Or was it
Yeah, I
math?
mean, I ended up in econ. I was more a math major I started out. I took pretty much all the courses for a math major,
Yeah.
but then the math, especially there at Princeton, is fairly abstract,
Mm.
and I I wanted, you have to do there. You have to do what they call junior papers and then a senior thesis. So you do
Mm.
some research work, and I asked if there was any place where people do applications where you can actually apply math.
Oh, so you were interested in applied math even back then?
Yeah, yeah. So I actually went, it's serendipitous, but the guy who was running the undergraduate research program at that point in the math department was Harold Kuhn, who's a
Oh,
game
wow.
theorist. Yeah. And so he said, "Why don't you go see this guy in the econ department named Hugo Sonnenschein? He
Huh.
uses math in some of his research." And so then he sent me over and I made an appointment with Hugo. And Hugo was kind enough to meet with me. And I said, "Look, I've been studying convex analysis and, various things in math. Is there any way to apply it in economics?" He said, "Yeah, yeah." So then he became my advisor. And
Kuhn
that's,
is Kuhn Tucker, right?
yeah, Kuhn's from Kuhn Tucker and, extensive form game theory. And
I, for some reason, thought he was an economist. He
yeah,
wasn't.
no, no, no. He was a
Oh,
mathematician.
he's a
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
mathematician.
yeah. Yeah.
But he doesn't think. So he's thinking applied. He sends you to the econ.
Yeah, so he sent me to I mean he was friends with Hugo and he said, that Hugo does the kind of math that you're interested in and
Oh,
applies it to,
what does he
some
mean? The
models.
kind of math you're interested in? What does that mean?
Well, I was interested in studying. So I was doing various forms of analysis, and I studied some convex analysis, and I was interested in set theory and so forth,
Uh-huh.
and topology, and those actually have application in basic models of consumer decision and so forth that Hugo
Yeah.
was working on, and,
Oh,
and so that
what are you, like a junior then? This is or
yeah,
sophomore?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I was a junior.
So what do
Yeah.
you end up doing? You end up double majoring in econ math, or is
Well,
it?
then I just switched over to econ at that point. So they
Oh,
allowed me to transfer some of the math courses and get credit for that. And then I took some econ courses and
why'd you
uh,
do that? You could just immediately tell that you were going to go in this direction. You could tell them pretty quickly.
yeah, I mean, actually that year I took the graduate sequence in micro
Oh,
in econ. And so
who taught that?
Hugo
Oh,
was
he
one of the
did.
teachers, and
Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm trying to remember. David Card taught part of it, and I'm trying to remember who taught all of it. But yeah, so I ended up taking that, and then I took a course. Hervé Moulin was visiting. He was teaching social choice theory, so I took a course in that, and
ah.
and so there were just really interesting courses in econ at that point, and so I took those, and they allowed me to transfer some credits over, and then I did my undergraduate research stuff in econ, and so it just
Well,
became an
so
econ.
were you, like, from the moment you got to Princeton already thinking, I want to go to grad school? Does that, or is that just like a natural thing that just happens gradually?
I think it happened gradually. I had no idea I wanted to do that, and I had no idea what a PhD was in terms of econ. Uh,
Mm.
I really didn't know. And I didn't know I really wanted to do research until I started working with Hugo and
Mm,
started working on these projects. He basically just tossed me a couple problems. He just said, well, here's, we're trying to think about what does uh, consumer choice look like under continuous preferences? And so,
mm.
can you derive some properties of that? And so that was my
That was your
first.
undergraduate thesis? Did you ever publish that? Is that
Yeah, I
your jet?
published it. I
Those are your
actually
jet?
published two papers out of that. Yeah, one in Journal of Math Econ and one in Jet. Yeah, yeah.
That's your first two pubs.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, that
yeah,
was your undergraduate thesis?
yeah, yes, yes. They came out of my
Wow.
undergraduate thesis. Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it got me excited about doing research and sort of pushed me, towards
Huh.
it became natural then to go on because I had no idea what I wanted to do at that point.
Wow. So, I mean, I always feel weird asking, like, well, why'd you pick Stanford? Because it's like, why'd you go to one of the best programs in the world? But like, well, was there, I mean, I'm sure you had some choices you could have made and like gone. So what is going on at Princeton in 84 that makes it kind of interesting to a guy like you?
Yeah, so actually it was interesting, this was Hugo again. So
Mm.
where I should go to grad school, basically everybody at that point says go to MIT, which is
Yeah.
the usual advice. And Hugo said, actually there's if you go to Stanford Business School, there's this amazing group of people doing game theory and theory that you might really enjoy. It was Krebs, Roberts, Wilson,
Oh.
Milgram had moved. I mean, it was an incredible group of people around Stanford doing theory. And so
Huh.
he said, yeah, I think, you might really fit in there. And I
Hugo
went out.
notices that he feels like that's a good fit for you, given the kind of guy that he sees you becoming.
Yeah, yeah. He was an amazing man in so many ways.
Huh.
And, he spent a lot of time. I can't imagine how busy he was and how much time he spent with me, the undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
He came to one of my gymnastics meets
Oh,
with his
wow.
wife, and he invited us over to his home. I mean, he was just like this amazing guy. And so he got to know people, and
Yeah.
then he would get to know you well and think about what was good for you as a person.
Mm,
And
mm,
he could just see that I would fit at Stanford, and
mm,
said, okay, that's the place. And he was actually going to visit the next year. So he visited there in 84, 85, which was the first year of my PhD. And
mm.
so it was, yeah, it was amazing.
Wow. Uh, so you graduate in 4 years, and I don't want to go through it so fast, but I mean, who teaches that first year micro stuff for you?
So actually I because I'd had the core sequence already
Mm,
at Princeton, I didn't have to take the core micro, but
mm-hmm,
I did get courses I took like Krebs decision theory. I
mm,
took John Roberts had a class. So I in agency stuff. So yeah, I took
mm.
courses from uh, you know, that were pretty amazing theory courses.
Yeah.
Um,
Boy, that makes so much sense now, but I can't quite put it into words because I don't have the nuance of understanding of micro theory, but you studying with Milgram and Roberts and all of those guys, that does seem like I can see how I can see a little bit better about the kind of work you end up doing. What is it that you're getting though? What do you think the counterfactual Matt Jackson would have like if you thought of him at MIT? What's the value added that puts you on a different trajectory, you think, at Stanford with these professors?
Yeah, these kinds of existential
Yeah.
questions are hard to answer. But yeah, I think certainly it was a place that where you were taught to think very carefully and deeply about things.
Mm,
So I spent a lot of time early on doing research. So I think one thing that happened right off the bat is I was allowed to get credit for past courses and so forth. And I spent time in the first 2 years writing papers and doing research right away.
mm,
And and I think that, I learn a lot by just getting involved in a problem and then learning the tools that you need
Mm.
for that particular problem rather than sitting in a class and
Learning the tools.
yeah. And so I spent just a lot more time doing that, and I think that that was very formative for me in
Yeah.
terms of the, the
That's a
what I
real
learned
backward
from the
way.
process.
I'm curious, is that it's like a you see that you try to explain some of that stuff to students, that they'll go in econ and they'll be like, I just don't have nearly enough and I got to take all these classes. And it's funny, the stories like that you tell are not as uncommon, but they're hard for students to understand, which is that you just start with research and then the projects are where you cut your teeth a lot. Is that what it was like for you?
Definitely. Yeah,
Huh.
completely. In the sense, and I think one thing that is hard to appreciate is, when you're given a problem to answer in a math exam or something like that, it's a well-structured problem. It has an answer. Um, and you sort of you go through the hoops of whatever it takes to answer it, and then you forget it a little bit. But
Mm,
if you're forced to be thinking about a problem and trying to understand what tools you need to answer it and so forth, you
mhm,
think about it in a different way and you think about it more deeply. And then when you go to get the tools, you know why you need them,
mm.
and you're actually going to get them because they're going to be helpful for you,
Yeah,
right? And
right.
it's not just because somebody's telling you to do it, it's because you want that tool.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, oh, I'm reading this because I really need to understand this theorem, not
Mm,
because I'm told to understand this theorem, or I need
mm.
to understand it just enough to apply it. I really need to understand it inside out.
And I
And
need to just understand that one.
yeah,
Because it's
exactly. And so
like there's
then,
like an infinite amount of stuff that you could learn, and you want that one thing.
right, exactly. And then I think, like when you're reading other work and papers and things, when you have a purpose to it, it's
Yeah.
very different than when you're just reading it because you're supposed to read it and
Right.
doing it
Oh, yeah.
superficially.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I bet you in those 4 years, then the way you're describing it, I bet there probably were some really exciting intellectual experiences that you probably had just as a personal discoveries. Do you remember any of them that were like really made an impression on you?
Yeah, sure. So the first year, so as a student there, you get assigned as an RA to a professor. And the first year I was there, Hugo was visiting, and Salvador Barbera, who's
Mm,
an economist from Barcelona, was also visiting there, and he was a former Hugo student. And
mm,
so Hugo suggested somehow to the GSB that I be assigned as Salvador's research assistant.
mm,
Um, and so I was assigned as his research assistant. We ended up writing a paper that year, axiomatizing some decision rules.
mm,
And then we've been co-authors and friends, since then, I guess
mm.
since, it's not 40 years of friendship and co-authorship together, came out of that first year at Stanford. He was visiting, and, I was his RA, and,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it was wonderful. It was an amazing time. And that was that time, that year was quite special because
Yeah.
Hugo brought a lot of his grad students to there at the same time. So Farouk
Mm.
Goul came, and then that was the Goul, Sonnenschein, Wilson paper came out of that. And then
Oh,
Inku Cho came, and Cho Krebs came out of that. And so like it was this really wild, very energetic intellectual year. Then I was
wow.
just like a first year grad student, soaking all this in, and yeah, it was pretty amazing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Remind me again. I was I got lost in the Vita. Remind me again where you end up going right after you graduate.
So after I finished at Stanford, I went to Northwestern.
Oh, you went to
Um,
Northwestern.
yeah,
Okay.
I went to Meds and Kellogg. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, is that the business school? Is
Yeah,
Northwestern
that's in the
Kellogg?
business school. Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. And
Was
that's a
it really
place.
common for the business schools back then to hire these like hardcore theorists?
No, so actually, that's another fascinating piece of economic history, which is Don Jacobs formed the school, which I guess originally was the Commerce School at Northwestern.
Hmm.
And so he transforms this and suddenly thinks, okay, look, I want to make this into a world-class business school. How am
Hmm.
I going to do that when I've got this kind of school of commerce? And what he does is he goes out and I think he gets Stan Reiter. He hires a couple of guys, and they basically say, look, we're going to invest in this area of game theory mechanisms, a bunch of stuff that's kind of brewing that nobody else is doing.
Yeah.
And they hire Meyerson, Milgram, Holmstrom. You go through
Oh.
this list of
They bring
people.
them all from Stanford. So
Well,
they're
not from
bringing some of
Stanford,
them
but
from
this is
Stanford.
before. This is before they went to.
Oh, this
Right?
is
So,
before.
yeah. I mean, so there's
Know
a bunch of
about.
John Roberts. So all these guys, they
Yeah.
come. So there's like a connection through Purdue that a lot of them did their
Mm-hmm.
PhDs there. Ledger's there. I think Musk. So I'm trying to remember all the people that are there, but it's quite a crowd.
How does this person, why is that why is that the strategic angle? I think about a business school now I mean, of course I don't, that's why they don't entrust me to build pioneering things, but like, I wouldn't have seen that opportunity.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I don't know. I mean, Don Jacobs he was very forward looking, and
Mm,
he realized, look, actually, the way to build a premier business school is to build a premier faculty.
mm.
And we're going to do it by going into areas that are a
Oh,
little bit high risk and not, they ended up hiring Kotler, who ended up being one of the premier marketing guys in the world.
huh.
So they were hiring people, but doing stuff that was, not the mainstream at that point in time.
Mm,
And his payout, it worked. He was also one of the first business schools to go heavy into executive education and seeing that was going to
mm.
be useful to doing international collaborations. He somehow had this forward-looking ability and really turned Kellogg into a pretty amazing institution.
Wow. What do you think they saw in you then? I mean, I know you're probably modest, but like, what was it? They were like, that's why Matt is going to be perfect. What do you think they saw?
Yeah, I mean, I was at that point I was very much a sort of a highbrow theorist doing
Mm,
um you know hard theoretical problems was what I enjoyed doing. And that fit very much with the culture there and so
yeah.
forth. So it it was a little bit shocking the first time I taught, teaching MBAs,
Oh,
but it's a miles away from your research.
right.
But it was an environment that was very encouraging of research, and it had a really strong history in doing theory, and
Huh.
so yeah, it was a great place.
Does a business school take a theorist and kind of bend them a little bit even more towards applied work than like they might have been otherwise?
I think it was amazingly hands off that way. I mean, I
Mm,
think that the deans really trusted the departments in terms. So there was a minimum bar that you had to have in terms of you needed to be able to teach, and
uh-huh.
so they
Right.
wanted people that were clear communicators. But
Mm,
the research they wanted, you could do pretty much anything you wanted,
mm,
and that worked very well.
mm-hmm,
I think nowadays there's probably more pressure, a little bit more pressure than there was at the time,
mm-hmm.
as business school world has become more competitive, and
Yeah.
it's a little tougher now. But I think at
Mhm.
that point in time, they were pretty hands off in terms of the research directions.
Well, how long do you stay there?
So I was there for 9 years.
Hmm.
Um, so the first 9 years of my career,
That would
and
be, you graduate 88,
yeah, 88. So I was there till 2000.
97. Okay.
Yeah, 97. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No network. No
Yeah.
network
So
at all at that time, is there?
no networks research, you mean, or
Is there
network?
networks research? I was trying to like figure
Yeah,
out
yeah, yeah.
where do I
So
see it start? I thought it was
yeah.
2000.
So actually, the first paper I wrote was with Asher Walensky
Uh-huh.
while I was at Northwestern. So we started working on that in 1992. So it was actually 4 years after I got there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so it was just a chance, lunch conversation I had with Asher where we were talking about power, like how do you get power? What is power? How,
Oh.
what would happen? So we start thinking about a game theoretic model of forming connections, and that led to our first paper,
Is
which
there a
then
precedent at all in the micro literature for that kind of a, well, I guess there's like Nash bargaining models and things where you can kind of see power a little bit, but like, was there something, are you building on something at that
yeah,
time?
the closest thing that existed was actually after we started working on this. Roger Meyerson was my next door neighbor in terms of offices, So I knock on Roger's door and ask him about this. And he had done a little bit of work in cooperative game theory. So
Uh-huh.
cooperative game theory, when you think about the Shapley value and things like that, they're
Hmm.
talking about distributions of power, who contributes how much to
Yeah.
which coalitions and so forth. So he
Hmm.
had done a graph-based version of that. So he had thought about what happens if only certain people can communicate in via some graph. What does that mean for cooperative game theory?
Oh,
So
when is
that was,
that?
huh?
When is that? What's that paper?
He has that stuff in I guess the late 80s.
Huh.
Um, so he has a paper which defines something called the Meyerson value, which is
Oh.
an extension of the Shapley value to a graph-based thing. So there's like a little bit there. And then Asher and I basically think about the network formation aspects of that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that, yeah. But
You're immediately adopting that graph kind of framework too when you're doing it. I mean, you don't have to do that in trying to talk about power, but you're immediately going into networks.
yeah, exactly.
How'd y'all think to do that? Why is it you're going from having a conversation about powers to thinking about networks?
Maybe it's like, this sticks in my mind, but I love movies, and
Uh-huh.
I think the Godfather's always been a movie
Yeah.
that, it's, if you think about power, okay,
Uh-huh.
how does the Godfather accumulate power? Well, what does he do? He's basically, it's personal connections.
Yeah.
And he's putting people and his ability to put people in touch with each other and to call on
Yeah.
favors and to be an intermediary for information. Information flows through
Oh,
him, and so then you start naturally thinking about, okay, well, that's the kind of power we were talking about in that lunch conversation. And then you
yeah.
start thinking, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, how do you form those connections? And well, now people want to, connect to you because you're central, and
Huh.
so we start thinking about that as
It
and
gets
then
that robust. That first paper has all of that in it already, even the centrality and all this. All this is immediately in there.
not immediately, but that was sort of the thinking behind the
Wow.
modeling that we put together. I think was, yeah, these, how do we talk about, well, how do you form a friendship, and how do you get value from those friendships, and how does it flow from indirect connections? And yeah, that's sort of
When
the.
did you notice, Matt, that it was like, man, network theory is got a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm going to have a lot of fun for a long time if I do this.
Yeah, so that comes from probably another lunch conversation. So then a few years later, I'm visiting in Paris actually again. So I'd love to go back to Paris. So I took a chance to do a visitorship there, and met with Tony Calvo.
Yeah.
Um, and Tony was visiting. He was had gone to school in France, and so he was visiting there, and he was thinking about job contact networks. And
Uh-huh.
so then, start reading Granovetter's work from sociology on how people get jobs, and start thinking about simple models of that, and it's realizing, look, we can take all these tools, like thinking about things from an economist perspective
Hmm.
answers a lot of questions that sociologists don't ask because they think about things differently.
Yeah.
And so they have a lot of things that they've done, and a huge amount of empirical work that's very
Yeah.
valuable, but they have a different perspective. And so then we're bringing a sort of game theoretic
Hmm.
and interactive perspective to it, and then thinking about how that works. And,
Hmm.
and so then I realized, look, that this seems to matter a lot. Yeah. I mean, most people find their jobs through contacts. That ends up being important. It's going to have implications for employment and wage levels. So we start thinking about modeling that,
Yeah.
and then that, sort of opens my eyes to a lot more applications. I'd also at that point started going to some sociology conferences.
Yeah.
And they have this Sunbelt conference that they run every year, which is a really impressive conference that brings together sort of the networks community in sociology,
Mm.
seeing all the different things that they're doing, stuff that overlaps with what you do, right? I mean, work on like AIDS and
Yeah.
sex work and all kinds of, applications I'd never thought about how networks could matter. And then,
Yeah.
suddenly seeing their conference and saying, wow, this is
Yeah.
amazing. And, bargaining stuff, trade, all these ideas come out. And then, yeah, it's just been a play,
I mean, network seems like the most cosmopolitan area of economics I've ever seen, because you've got like physicists, yeah, you got epidemiologists, mathematicians, sociologists, you've got like, even ethnographic types of stuff,
Yes.
and then you've got people, game theorists. It seems like that's got, when you think about economics kind of having like being siloed, networks is the least siloed I can even think of. It's just like everybody's interacting. Was that kind of cool to be involved in something like that?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's, it takes you way out of your comfort zone in some
Yeah.
ways because you're constantly at conferences where you're speaking slightly different languages but
Mm,
you're always exposed to new ideas and new applications. And you're
mm,
right, it cuts across so many areas because, pretty much anything that's organized,
yeah.
even, part of the reason it's been so powerful in economics is there's not any, if you think about some kind of centralized anonymous markets, they
Mm,
don't really exist. There's not many of
mm,
those.
yeah.
Most ways that businesses interact, that people interact, is with other people, and
Hmm.
those actual interaction patterns matter in many applications.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's natural in economics, but it's also natural in political science, right? I mean,
Uh-huh.
that's the way that legislation gets done, and it's
Right.
natural in sociology. If we want to think about kids growing up, that's important to them. And then all these different areas of application, and then physicists realize that they have this toolbox from statistical physics of interacting
Mm.
particles, which can be used, and so that brings
Mm.
them to it. And mathematicians have graph theory, and so that becomes an important toolbox.
Well, it
So
seems like you were really central then too, because a lot of the things you just said, really are things that you always felt like were really natural to you. The
yeah, I
physics
mean,
part, some people would have a difficult time kind of being able to make that leap between the disciplines. And I bet was it true that you felt a little bit like at home a little bit with all this interdisciplinary stuff?
I guess I part of it is I enjoy learning new tools, and
Uh-huh.
so I enjoyed learning graph theory because I
Yeah.
needed to learn graph theory, not because
Right.
I was taking some course in graph theory, right? Because I would
Yeah.
find out the books and go and find what I needed to learn from that, and I
Yeah.
enjoyed reading the physics. I'd been interested in, like, when I was in undergrad, I took some physics courses too, and thought about physics for a while, but
Yeah.
realizing, yeah, these physics tools can be useful, and
Oh,
so I just naturally love learning new techniques, and
right.
so it's an
But
area
it's
where,
demand driven.
yeah, yeah, demand, exactly, right. I mean, that's the fun way to explore and to learn, right, is because you
Mm.
want to learn it, not because somebody's telling you to learn it.
Right, right, right,
Yeah, yeah.
right. Yeah. That's so a lot of students, it's hard to articulate. This is really kind of helpful. It's hard to articulate to students sometimes that, hey, just start working on projects. Just start trying to write papers and then, learn what you need to learn. Let the project teach you as opposed to the everything you've done before then, which is take classes.
Yeah, yeah. I'm such a proponent of that style of learning. And
Mm,
and maybe it's not for everybody, but I think it's so useful. And I tell students to do that all the time. The hard
mm.
part is, to have confidence that what you're turning out is something anybody would be interested in.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like you start a project or something, and I was lucky early on. It was with Hugo, and he actually encouraged me. He said, "Yeah, this is interesting work, and you could actually publish this." And
Hmm.
it encouraged me to write it up and send it off to journals and things like that. But realizing that everybody has that kind of ability and creativity in them. It's
Yeah.
just, actually being confident enough to go
Hmm.
out and do it. And I think there's always, taking more courses, you could do that and procrastinate out of sort of more of
Yeah.
fear of, right? You just say, okay, well, yeah, I need some more tools, so I'm going to take this course and I'm going to take this course, and then you're all tooled up, but you haven't really learned them at a deep level.
Right, right, right,
Yeah.
right, right.
And maybe, you missed some things. Maybe I didn't have enough courses in macro or other
Yeah.
things that I could have taken, but
Hmm.
somewhere along the line, you can make up for that.
Yeah. So you said, so now that you're like an expert on networks, if you go back and you started at Adam Smith and read forward, can you see that these guys were that this actually does go back a little bit further than maybe even Meyerson or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly see it in Leontief and, input
Ah,
output stuff. Leontief was very much thinking about it, and turns out that like some of the math that he develops keeps popping up again all over the place
ah,
in networks.
ah.
So, there's people who are doing this stuff that it was very prescient. And I think some of the earliest deep work in networks is really coming out of the sociology literature.
Mm,
Simmel, like a century ago. There were a series of really good empirical studies done in the 40s and 50s.
mhm.
Uh, just, and then there were economists. George Schultz was one of
Mm.
the leading people in studying labor markets from a network perspective. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, people don't
well,
realize that he had
that's
that
crazy,
life
man.
before him.
Well,
Um,
so I bet you too, were you surprised pleasantly? Okay, so I'll set it up. One of the things that has been kind of interesting is to see this explosion in data. Just like so, like whereas historically you're like you got to work with, rich microdata from the federal government, which was also a big deal. But like there's so many unusual administrative data sets that become available and coincidentally can be linked and made into networks.
yeah.
I mean, was that kind of that's got to have been really exciting to make your work also have so much empirical content too. That doesn't happen to every theorist, it
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like.
yeah, yeah. And again, these lunch conversations, I think I should emphasize, are so important. So another
Uh-huh.
lunch conversation I have with somebody really sets me on the empirical path, and that's a conversation I have with Abhijit Banerjee. So
Oh,
I was in Abhijit's office at MIT, and this was, I guess, let's see, must have been 2005, and
he's already done the herding paper, so that's like
yeah,
the
he's done herding stuff, but he's also, they're forming JPAL at that point in time. So
uh,
they're forming the Poverty Action Lab, and he and Esther are working in the field a lot, and he starts asking me questions about, like what's next for networks and what do you think's important? And I said, well, we have these theories of centrality mattering and networks mattering. We don't have really well collected data that could answer these questions. It's, the kind of data that you're usually looking at is some graph that somebody got from a survey once, or
mm-hmm.
it's not matched to the kind of things that we want to be answering with, where you've got economic outcomes and the network structure, and you're sure of that. And so he said, oh, Esther's sister is working with some bank and they're thinking about diffusing information about microfinance. Maybe we should talk to them. And so we then, start talking with them and figuring out like how can we collect network data together with different outcomes in terms of participation in this program.
Yeah.
That's like really, but that kind of data collection wouldn't have been possible before that, right? I mean, the
Mm.
scale, we went into 75 villages, collected thousands of interviews per village.
Wow.
And, but that's like a huge scale difference that JPAL enables, and modern
Oh,
data collection and tabulation approaches enable.
yeah.
So that's the first work I have I think in serious data collection.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Um, well, I want to kind of talk a little bit about this new AI paper that you have, because in one way, it's like I saw your name on it, and I was like, wow, this seems very different from what you've normally done. But maybe it's not a Turing test of whether AI chatbots are behaviorally similar to humans. Can you sort of, for the sake of the listener, just kind of give us the big picture of what this paper is about?
Sure, yeah, yeah. So this is, it's taking your game theorist hat and saying, okay, look, if we want to test the AI, so AI is so hard to understand, partly because the coding is going to be difficult to get access to. And
Yeah.
even if you can see the code, now it's so big and cumbersome, it's hard to know exactly what's going on inside of it. Then it's
Right.
trained on data and you're not sure what the interaction between the code and the data is.
Yeah.
So these are basically
Right.
some kind of emergent complex system that are going to start behaving.
Yeah.
And now we're going to let it loose in the world, right? And
Hmm.
so I guess the question we were sort of saying is, okay, well, we need to be able to test these things. They're going to be interacting with humans.
Yeah.
So if we want to test how they're going to interact with humans, what are tools we could use? Well,
Mm-hmm.
game theory, right? I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
let's have them play some games, see how they play. So stick them in a prisoner's dilemma, see what they do. Stick them in a trust game, see what they do. Give them some risk choices where they can choose between lotteries, see what they do. Basic games that we use all the time to study with undergrads and so forth, right?
Yeah.
We test them in the lab, and
These
so
are
this,
off the shelf language models. This is like GPT stuff. GPT. Who are you? Well, is it
yeah.
what
So
kind of?
we used Chat GPT 3 and 4. And
Oh,
I guess nowadays these things become obsolete really quickly
yeah.
because they're evolving so
Right.
rapidly.
Right.
So
What do you find? So you got them. So what do you tell me some of this cool stuff you find?
yeah, so I guess so, basically, first of all, perhaps not surprisingly, they fit pretty well within the human distribution. So if you look at the distribution
Oh,
of human play,
yeah.
uh, they're in that distribution.
Wow.
Um,
How do they
so
play Prisoner's Dilemma?
Well, I mean, so one thing that's interesting is they tend to cooperate. They're more on the cooperative side than most
They're
humans.
so nice.
Yeah, so they're nice.
These
They're a little more
chatbots are so
altruistic.
nice.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
exactly.
hilarious.
Yeah,
Wait,
yeah,
so they tend to cooperate.
yeah. They tend to cooperate. They tend to be more altruistic. If you can actually do a revealed preference thing where you sort of ask what payoff function would explain their behavior best,
Yeah.
and it's basically an even match between their payoff and their partner's payoff, right? So it's like
Why do you think it's doing that?
it's hard to know. I mean, somewhere deep into programming is something that's saying, look, you're supposed to be helping the person that's asking the questions or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's hard to know, right?
It's hard
So
to know because this transformer doesn't, I mean, this transformer is so weird, this attention mechanism, because it's not obvious why it would ever even remotely be doing something like that.
exactly, yeah, yeah. So I think that that's the kind of thing you want to be sure of too, because if you're going to stick it out there to be helping people, you don't want it to be deceiving them or or trying to manipulate them in some ways. You
Mm.
do want it to have the right welfare function
Yeah, right,
behind the
right,
scenes, and
right, right.
yeah. And
Well, so go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that I think the most surprising thing that came out of this was, um, so when you're a human, if we put you into a game, and let's suppose there's two roles, like a trust game, right? So in a trust
Mhm.
game, you give some money to the other player. The other player can either keep it and not give any back to you, or can give it back to you and it triples, right? So the idea is, I give you some money, you can either keep it or give it back to me. If you give it back to me, it's going to be worth a lot more.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I have to trust you, and then you don't have to give any back to me, right?
Yeah.
So, um, and now if you have a human play that game, putting the human in the responder role before you're in the truster role, the first giver role, it forces you to think through the game, and now you have to think about the other person's perspective, what the other person might do.
Yeah.
So people learn from that, and people
Mm.
who are educated in both roles of a game, once I've played the second role, I'll play the first role differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Chatbots did that too.
Oh,
I found that weird, right? And the weird you think it's weird is because they're trained on data, right? Why are they actually learning? Like, how can they be learning from being in a different role? I haven't played this role first, and now they play differently than they did before.
yeah.
That's suggesting that they're actually learning on the fly in some way. I
I
don't know.
wonder, is it OpenAI GPT? Did y'all ever play it across any of the others? I don't really know a lot of them, but I know that OpenAI is, doing its own. They seem to be a very risk averse company in a lot of ways because they don't let it be. You couldn't, it won't give you. They have a whole list of terms of service or stuff it won't do. Won't
Yeah,
give you medical advice.
yeah.
So like, so is it? Do you think it's the large language model, or do you think it's the Affirm?
I think that's part of the reason that I think developing these kinds of tests is
Yeah,
important. Is
across
it's
of them.
hard to know what's the determinant, and until we have a bunch of these different companies, bots, and
Yeah.
and once we've tested a lot of these different AIs and ways, so this is just like one way to poke them and see
Yeah,
what they're
yeah, yeah.
doing. But I think
Mhm.
we need lots of ways to poke them and
Yeah.
see how they react, right?
Hmm.
And the more that we can do this and develop some battery of tests that we can put them through,
Hmm.
then we can begin to evaluate. Okay, these ones. So I think a lot of the evaluation people naturally think of as how fast are they? Are they factual? Are they, but we want to understand, look, we're going to put them in this place interacting with humans. We're going to give them decision-making capabilities. Are they good decision makers?
They're going to be interacting with each other too.
Yeah, they're going to interact with each other. Some of them might be programming other ones.
Yeah.
Can we trust them to program benevolently?
Right, right. Do you think that anything you did, do you think all the work that you've done on network theory, which is all about human networks, do you think that it's probably going to be useful, or is it going to be even more? I mean, they're going to form network like I guess, I mean, it sounds 5 years ago this would have been a ridiculous question, but like, I mean, are they going to form networks? And if so, is it different given that they might be a little bit nicer than us or less, little bit more altruistic, or should we expect different things? Because lots of times they
Yeah,
could even be nicer, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the overall networks are nicer or something. It's all kinds of odd things can happen.
I agree completely. I think, when you think about the evolution of the web and what it's done, I don't think, 15, 20 years ago, no one had any conception of these media platforms that would come up, like where you're interconnecting people, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram,
Hmm.
YouTube, all these different ways in which people are going to be interacting, which they never interacted before.
Yeah,
And I'm guessing AI is going to have a whole nother level of revolution where it's not just enabling more interaction between humans, but you've got all these human machine interactions that are
yeah,
going on. And, how does the feedback work between that and machine to machine, as you're mentioning, like machine to machine networks. So you've
right.
got these new levels of networks that will emerge where there's all these different parties who are in their own realms making decisions in companies, making decisions in, human decisions, making decisions as doctors or whatever they might be.
Yeah.
Those are all going to be interacting in new ways.
Uh-huh.
And we'll have to understand those as they evolve.
Well, so as you're working on this kind of thing, do you think that this is going to be probably an area that you're going to keep being interested in, or is it taking you away from your day job a little bit?
No, no, definitely. I mean, my day job is always whatever I'm interested in.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's the luxury
That's
of
the
what we
great
do,
part of the
right?
job.
So I think we've got the nicest job in the
Have the
world,
nicest job. That's right. Yeah. I mean, so what is it now that you're working on this? Historically you've been like, well, I'm interested in networks. I'm going to go learn graph theory. What are you having to learn that you're excited about that you didn't, know?
Yeah, so one thing I'm starting to think about and learn about is collective intelligence.
Hmm.
So and this comes out of Santa Fe Institute too. There's a lot of modeling there of decentralized systems for computing. How do cells organize themselves? How do bacteria organize themselves? Those are interacting systems that
Yeah.
are very much networked,
Mm-hmm.
and they store information, they learn, they evolve, they
Mm-hmm.
adapt, they compete with each other. So it's very much like human societies, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot that they know that we could probably learn from
Mm.
that we haven't, right? And
Yeah.
thinking of like societies as these evolving systems, I think that's a fascinating area. That's
Yeah.
my reading list now of wish list of things I want to read is full of stuff on this kind of work.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, um, well, I guess the last thing I'll just sort of end with is I feel like I know what you're going to say, but I did put it in here. What is it that in to conclude here, if you just kind of just were given a talk to the graduate students or even undergraduates and trying to help them understand, what it is that has been the driving force for you that gets you out of bed every morning and that makes you excited to get out of bed the next day. What would you say? Because everybody's different, and you never want to give it. It's hard to always figure out what advice do you give, but you understand yourself well. What is it about you that sort of is this like driving energy that if you lost that, you might go look for a different kind of job?
Yeah, I mean, I think and this is something I do advise my students and others on, is I think curiosity, a really good day for me is not one where I've accomplished some, got something published or gotten something over. A really good day for me is I've learned something new, right? There's something new that I feel like, wow, I know more than I did before. I understand the world differently than I did before. And
Yeah.
I think part of that is asking questions, asking lots of questions of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're stupid questions. Don't be afraid to ask lots of stupid questions.
Yeah.
But I just tell them it's like being a photographer. Photographers, it's not like they take the one perfect picture. It's that they take thousands and thousands of pictures, and then some
Right.
of them turn out to be great.
Yeah.
And you get that great picture by asking lots and lots of questions, and
Mm-hmm.
then you learn things, you get new perspective, and yeah, it's just, I think, curiosity. It's like, yeah, I love just asking questions. And I think when I think of people that I most admire, Ken Arrow is one of the people
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to overlap with here. And he is amazing, 95 years old, and he's still asking questions about everything, all the
Yeah.
time. And I just think, wow, it's just, if I'm 95 and asking questions of everything,
Yeah.
I'd be a really happy person.
That's right. That's right. I just before we end, I actually was going to ask you. So you said Arrow. Who is it? Who are the people now at your, you know, who are the people that you have just been sort of your maybe heroes isn't the right word, but these people that you were always looking up to and maybe kind of trying to maybe not emulate, but they were definitely you were watching them and thinking, I wouldn't mind being a little bit like them when I grow up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, as I mentioned Hugo through
Oh,
this conversation, I think he's one person that I appreciate so much more
huh,
how involved he was with people and how much he valued people, personal
uh,
connections. I'm naturally kind of more introverted person, and I think he was a little more on the extroverted side, and I
oh,
think that's something I really admire. Yeah, Ken Arrow for his curiosity. Like Al Roth, I've been lucky to be a colleague of,
yeah,
a person who's always trying to think about how he can take his research and improve the world, and,
yeah.
actually not being afraid to take it into the field. And,
Hmm.
just, yeah, and there's different aspects. And I think that's one nice thing is, you look at different people and you see different things that they're uniquely good at,
Yeah,
and trying to admire those and see, yeah, can I be a little more like that?
yeah.
Make me a better person.
That's neat that Hugo inspires you not just as a scientist, but also just the kind of person he was.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. I
is.
mean,
Yeah.
he's probably the best family person you'll ever meet, and
Uh,
he has a wonderful family, and he had, yeah. I mean, he was special in that way, and that I think that's something we can all emulate.
that's right. That's right. Well, Matt, it's so nice. This was really fun. I didn't really get to go into all of the detail. Your Vita is so impressive, and but it's been so fun all these years to read your work. Because of my work on sex work, I read you early on. I read Al Roth early on, and they just kind of were like, because I was studying sexually transmitted infections, my dream was always to just like to just take what you had done and bring it to it. And you're a lot of fun, exciting economist to study. And I really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, thanks so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really, yeah. Thanks so much, and it's, yeah, a lot of fun.
Cool. All right. Well, you have a great day.
Okay, you too.
All
Thanks,
right.
Scott.